That is too guided. I just have to.
That's been everybody's, to be
Yeah,
honest. It's like,
yeah.
I'll say it, you let me know if we did it.
The
Yeah.
other thing you need to say is just lock eyes with Chris. No
Okay.
matter what, if Rosalie says something or Chris
Okay.
says something, just pretend Chris said it.
Okay.
It's fine.
I'll provide the warm eye contact.
I can do that. She's nice to lock eyes with, so I think I'm looking at my granddaughter here. And you are about her size and everything, so.
Really?
Yeah, she just started college, so.
How old is she? 18?
18, but she's already a junior because she was dual enrolled.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Is she at UA?
No, University of South Florida.
Okay, Tampa.
At Tampa.
Go Bulls. Just let me know when you're rolling, Denise, and I'll start.
I'm rolling. Let me just
Are you rolling to
move
fix?
the light for a second. Okay. Yeah. Do you want to see what the shot looks like?
Mm-mm.
You don't. Okay.
Mm-mm. I don't want to see this. I'm not going to like it. So. And I can't change a thing, so.
Look amazing.
So
Thank
we're going
you.
to say,
About the colors on
how did it all get started?
How do you feel, from your personal experience, how social activism, CR groups, consciousness raising practices started in Gainesville around the time for civil rights and women's rights?
Well, when I think of getting starting and thinking about African American women getting started in it, I have to go back farther than that. I have to go back to the fact that the segregation was felt very deeply by those of my age. I'm talking being in high school then, and having civics classes taught by our very esteemed Mr. Coward, who has now a building named after him because he took the time to explain to us what was going on, because we were in segregation and we were secondhand. We were getting all the books that didn't have backs on them. We were getting less funding. We were doing all of that. So his goal was for us to be active and trying to make things, not just women, he did it for all of us. But I think the thing that stuck with me was that I also had a teacher who was an activist, and her name was Mabel Dorsey. Actually, she's my idol. And she would step out of the boundaries of where black women usually were to take on extra, to do things. And I just adored her. She'd take me in a car and we'd do things with her. So that was before I was out of high school. Once I was out of high school, and my goal was then to go to college, of course, university was segregated. Not only that, they didn't take white women or any women, and they certainly didn't take black people. So the thing that I remember about that is that at the same time, and this would have been the 50s, somewhere late 50s, the women's movement era came to town. The women who started that were beginning to meet. They met at the hotel that's on the corner, University Avenue and 13th Street. It's still there. It's had many names, but the second floor in a meeting room up there somewhere, we met for the women's movement and started to get things going there. And women came together who knew that things were not quite right. And they weren't right at all, especially for the fact that university, their husbands could come to town and get a job, and they were prepared for jobs with their degrees and all, but the university wasn't hiring them. And those same women were the women who saw that voter registration was not happening and enough to get things changed, and that weren't going to get changed unless black people were equally involved in the voting process. So that little group of women, not little group, it was mostly University of Florida wives of professors there. And then there's some city women who were involved. These were the white women involved. They brought in activists that were African Americans. And I don't know how they all got started, because I wasn't in the original beginning of that. When I joined, I know that there were a lot of teachers who were moved into white schools, and eventually, not in the 60s, that didn't happen until the 70s when they actually started going to white schools. But they were wanting to fight against all the discontent as well. So this was great. GWER invited them to come in, and as one came in and they find another, until we had a group of women who were strong. And they met and divided into groups depending on what they were going to work on. The political group was finding out, well, what are the commissioners going to do that we can be involved in, and then the schools, the inequalities and and the busing and all of those things, whatever. I couldn't itemize all the issues. I just know that there's a group of very astute women out there trying to figure that out. I was on the healthcare committee because I was in nursing. Actually, I chaired the healthcare committee along with Mabel Dorsey and Alice. Well, Alice's last name, I can't remember. I will before we get through. Anyway, there were 4 or 5 women on that committee. Mary Webb was on that committee with me, and we were in charge of finding a way to integrate hospitals and doctors' offices. That was quite an experience. But GWER's idea that we go ahead and do that. So I'm not sure if I got anywhere near your question, but the activism came, I think it was always in the minds of black women who were doing things. I think it became more powerful once they were joined together with white women with the same minds. And it was just like magic. You know, there was no discontent, nobody fighting again, everybody fighting for a cause. And so we met together, we had whatever we were going to eat that night or whatever, but we met for hours. In the wee hours of the morning, I remember coming home at 1 o'clock in the morning, my husband said, well, where in the world have you been? Well, the issues were so deep that we had to know that when we left there, we were going to be looking at an issue, we knew where we were going, and knew how we were going to be protected from whatever danger might surround what we were planning on doing, because marches and sit-ins and doing things that were contrary to what the city wanted, but women in this city were ready to get something done. So that's my memory.
Can you define GWER?
Yeah, I apologize.
No problem. And then maybe get into the point at which there was the equal rights, gender stuff going on, and the kind of the way it played out, it bifurcated a bit because of different priorities.
Well, I can remember sitting in, as I said, sitting in meetings with women who were getting the women's rights movement going on. That was separate from the group that I eventually joined. It was Gainesville Women for Equal Rights. This group had its founding through the women who came as wives of professors, University of Florida. And as that group grew and we met together, we addressed a lot of civil rights issues through Gainesville Women for Equal Rights. But the women's rights movement, almost the same women met in order to get those rights. And the difference here was that black women were in both groups, fighting for the rights of women, because we knew we needed those. But we also had to fight for our rights because we did not have equality. We didn't have rights for black women or black men. We didn't have what I call white privilege. And we were not going to get anywhere near that unless we had rules changed, rules that said we couldn't do this, or we can't sit here, can't do that. Downtown on the corner of Main Street and University Avenue was Woolworth Dime Store, they called it, 5 and Dime Store. We could go in there and buy a drink, but you couldn't drink it in there. Actually, that's not true. You couldn't go in there. You could go to a side window and buy a drink and get a hamburger out the side. But you could go in and shop and spend money there, but you couldn't eat anything in there. And that's when a group of, now these were black men led by Charles Chestnut, and they decided to take that on. But the group, the Gainesville Women for Rights, as they moved forward, they also worked with other civil rights groups that were active, and therefore women's rights and the civil rights movement really worked hand in hand because they were more powerful that way. My group, when I chaired the healthcare committee, my committee was in charge of finding ways to integrate the doctor's offices and the hospital. At that time, African Americans were on the second floor of Elisha General Hospital over the boiler room and no AC. The long hall on one side, women where women were. On the opposite side, men were in that room. Not separate rooms, not isolated rooms, all in the same long room. I remember having a little paper petition between me and the lady next to me who had syphilis when my baby was born. So they wouldn't bring my baby in the room. I had to sit in the hall and feed him because they didn't want him in the room. But I was in the room. And that's the way it was done at that time. Eventually, though, that was in around 58. He was born in 58. So our committee met between that time and 62 when my second child was born. And we met in the administrator's office. We got an appointment. He wasn't happy about that. But we did have an appointment with him to talk about it. And we explained to him, now I talked to this man because he wasn't ready to hear women talk. We'd had this experience before. White men did not want to hear women talk, period. And you were not supposed to come to them, tell them what to do. And he certainly wasn't going to listen if a black woman was going to do it. But I was hell-bound to do that because I chaired the committee, and that was my job. And so I said to him, with my committee there, that we came to speak with him about integration of the hospital because he was working on the funds that he received from the Hill-Burton law, which is a law that was passed, federal law, that said if you receive these dollars, you must have integration both in your staff and in the patients that are in this facility. Well, he swallowed hard and did a bunch of other fluttering things, but he didn't really say yes to us, but we got a message over. And we left. Well, the next step for us then was to turn it over to somebody who could go farther, and that became the civil rights group activists that got lawyers to come in out of Jacksonville, and they worked with the Board of Trustees of Electric General to work on that. And so that's how Gainesville Women for Equal Rights affected the health care at Electric General. But the other part, the doctor's offices, they weren't taking us in there either. So here we are, black people would go to a doctor's office, and every one of those offices had a little separate room, just about as wide as this, with chairs that black people sat in, almost so close your knees would touch. That's in the back door. And then there was a little hole in the wall, and you were to look through that hole in the wall and let them know you were there. And then they would take you back in to see the doctor. I remember this so vividly because my doctor was right there on 4th Avenue. And I remember going down this little sidewalk and into his back room. Well, our committee decided that on our the people who needed to go to the doctor next were not going in the back room. So Mabel Dorsey was pregnant with Rodney, and I was going to see my doctor. So Mabel decided that she would walk in the front door, and I knew that I was going to walk in the front door of my doc. And so we did. Nobody threw us out. It was amazing to see how nice that room was, though. But nobody threw us out, and therefore we went back to the group and said, all the black women, don't go in any more back doors. Go to the front. And I didn't hear of any incidents where there was anything negative. They weren't thrown out. They saw their doctor, and it became the thing they did. Now, that was the doctor's offices. The dentist was a whole different story. Dentists would not see black people. We were driving to Ocala. There was one dentist here, but some of us were going to Ocala as well. Our reason they gave us when we did get in the dentist's office, one of them said that this one was right on 2nd Avenue on the street behind Electric General, and big house that's still there. I don't remember his name, but what he said to us was that he needed a day to get ready to see us. So he needed Wednesday morning to get his instruments and stuff ready or whatever. And so he could see us on a Wednesday afternoon when he closed his office down. And then he would see black patients on a Wednesday afternoon. I said, I sure hope your white patients know that you're cleansing, taking a whole day to clean after us because you need to clean after them too. But anyway, it was stupid and crazy. You hear some of that stuff now though. But eventually things changed. My sons were then about, I guess 6 and 10 or somewhere along this time, by the time we started to integrate a dentist office on 4th Avenue. I'm not sure of his name. I don't want to throw it out because I'm really not sure, but he was a great doctor because my friend who was on the committee with me said to me, Vivian, your sons can go see my dentist, or why don't we try? I said, well, you call and see if he can get an appointment. And she called. Now the receptionist was fluttering. She just wasn't sure that she could get my sons in because she'd never seen any black patients there. So my friend said to her, why don't you go and ask the doctor if he will see them? She did, and he said, I will see whoever makes an appointment. So my boys on 4th Avenue around, I think that's around 6th Street and 4th Ave. There was a group of offices back in that cubby hole back there, and his office was there. And I took them in, and we went in the front door. They saw the dentist forever. And my story is, I didn't know this story until later. My son, Craig, he's the youngest, he's 4 years younger than his brother, he said, I didn't want to go back one time, Mama, because Delna tried to hit the doctor. I said, what? Delna said, well, he was hurting me, so he's slanging. And so the doctor said, oh, I'm sorry. And he did something about it. But Craig was a little cautious about going back. He was a great doctor, and so that worked out. But then other doctors began, and I don't really remember totally what that time span was between when other doctors started to see African American patients. But we told our friends about this doctor so that they would go there. But you know, there's those nuances of they're running 2 rooms, 2 separate. It's like all of the separate water fountains and the separate bathrooms and the separate everything that they had for segregation that just was extra, but they were never kept up to par. You know, if we went to town